Today, I sat down with Senator Eric Brakey to give you an inside look at some of the current issues in Augusta. Take a look. I'm here with Senator Eric Brakey, and he's going to give us some inside information on obstructionist tactics that Democrats are using in Augusta that you won't hear about in the mainstream media. Senator, what's going on in Augusta?
Hey, happy to be here. It's a lot less stressful here than it is over at the State House. So.
I'm sure.
Yeah. So we're in the middle of budget negotiations. We're coming down to a deadline in just a few days where folks are really concerned if there isn't an agreement that 2/3 of the House and Senate can agree on for the budget, that we might be heading towards a government shutdown, which I'll say very clearly, at least no one on the Republican side of the aisle wants to see happen. Sometimes I wonder about on the other side of the aisle, but no one on the Republican side of the aisle wants to see a government shutdown. I think, unfortunately, politically, I think based on what we've seen in the past, I think some on the Democrat side think that if the government shuts down, that they can blame it all on Republicans, which in fact we've seen in some of their political messaging that they've been using. They're already getting ready to blame it all on Republicans if the government were to shut down. But I think that they really have a lot to lose too, and they should really be aware of that. But in these budget negotiations, Republicans have come to the table, compromised a lot to try to get to consensus, sometimes compromised more than even what I might at times, as a very fiscally conservative person, be completely 100% comfortable with. But that's part of the negotiating process when you're trying to get to 2/3. But we're seeing that I think it's a very far left strain in the Democrat Party that doesn't necessarily represent Democrats back at home. It's a very far left socialist strain that won't even budge on some of the very most basic things. Here we are a few days out from a deadline where if we don't get there, we could face a government shutdown, and we can't even get agreement that we have vacant positions in the Department of Health and Human Services and in other departments in the government. Positions that have been vacant for years, but we keep budgeting money for them year after year after year, even though the positions stay unfilled. The various departments say they have no intention to fill them. They don't need people in these positions. And yet the leaders on the Appropriations Committee on the Democrat side are still refusing to budge on taking funds away from these vacant positions and putting them towards things that are more crucial, like adding funding for services for those with intellectual disabilities and autism. That's something that was a priority in the governor's budget. There was about $4 million of vacant positions in the Department of Health and Human Services. Also, a new program that would cost about $4 million to support folks with intellectual disabilities and autism. That could be an easy one-to-one transfer, but we can't even get folks on some of the lead Democrats on the Appropriations Committee to budge on even that. And if we can't get agreement on something as common sense as taking money away from empty positions to fund services for those with intellectual disabilities, then some of the even bigger questions about the 3% tax increase, funding for education, I'd say it's like pulling teeth, but I'm not sure we're getting any of those teeth out.
It is just mind-blowing to me that there are positions, $4 million worth of positions that are not even occupied right now, and that money could go towards people, Maine's most vulnerable. And I can't understand how anyone would want to prevent that money from going to those people. It's this mentality that, I can't get it, and I'm sure that you have a difficult time understanding it as well. But I think it's important that we tell everybody at home about what's going on and about the reality of what's happening in the State House and the reality of what's happening with the budget and this money, and how there are places we could be putting money that it's not going to right now. But it's very reassuring to hear that Republicans, it sounds like we have our heads in the right place, and I think that we're going towards hopefully good negotiation.
Well, I will say, I think that Republicans have drawn a very clear line in the sand, both Senate Republicans and House Republicans, that we will not accept any budget proposal that increases the income tax by 3% on successful people in the state and Maine's small businesses. I think one thing that's not often realized with this 3% tax, but I know that the Maine GOP has been doing a very good job of publicizing, is this 3% tax increase that the Democrats are clamoring for would actually make Maine's small businesses pay a higher tax rate, about 2% of a higher tax rate than Maine's big businesses.
Right.
Businesses registered as corporations versus kind of the mom and pops. The mom and pops would be paying significantly more. And it would make it so that we would have the highest top marginal tax rate in the country here in the state of Maine for people who make less than $1 million. That would put us, and we are already struggling. I think every Maine person knows folks who have, maybe they've worked here their entire life, they hit retirement age, and then they say, you know what, I'm going to Florida for 6 months and a day. Because they don't want to pay the taxes here. And who can blame them? But these are the kinds of people who, if we could get them to stay here, these are the kinds of people who invest in their communities, who are benefit. These are the kinds of people who are very philanthropic. And we are seeing these people leaving. We are seeing job creators leaving. We are seeing medical professionals leaving because of this 3%. I chair the Health and Human Services Committee. We are already been dealing with a doctor shortage and a medical professional shortage, and this is just compounding on top of that. Now, when we have asked people who voted for question 2, which passed by a very slim margin. I think Democrats often act like there was this big mandate about it, but it passed with just barely over 50% of the vote. When you ask people who voted for question 2, did you vote for this because you wanted more money for education, or did you vote for this because you wanted to tax successful people? 4 out of 5 times, people tell you, well, we wanted more money for education.
Right.
They didn't care where the money came from. They just wanted more money for education. So the Senate Republican budget has proposed more money for education. $100 million, in fact, which some Republicans, on the House side feel goes a little too far. People at home can judge that for themselves. But that $100 million would fund education at 55%, which is what Democrats have been saying for the longest time, that's what they wanted to get to. Ironically, when they were in power, they never managed to get to 55%, but now the Senate Republicans have put forward a budget that does get education funding up to 55%. And now that that's there, you would think if that's what the Democrats really wanted, was more education, more funding for education, funding at 55%, you'd think that they would take it and run with it. But in fact, we just had a vote the other day where all but 3 Democrats voted to add the 3% tax back on top of the Senate Republican budget in addition to the $100 million that's there. So that tells you, they say it's about more funding for education. We'd like to believe it's about more funding for education. But at the end of the day, Senate Republicans are offering more funding for education. They're offering to fund it at 55%, and they're insisting on raising taxes on Maine people and Maine small businesses. So what that tells me is it's really about punishing successful people. It's really about this sense of that it's unfair that some people have earned more than others. But that's what happens in a free market society. That's what happens in America. We reward people who go out and earn a living, and if you're successful, more power to you. We should not be dragging down the successful just for the purpose of dragging down the successful. And we should always keep in mind, I think politicians forget this, that the money that Maine people earn, it's not our money. It's their money. Mm-hmm. And we need to respect that.
And it almost seems it's not about even necessarily the successful people, but even the thriving people. If you have a Main Street economy, and I'm from Brunswick, and I know even in Auburn and Lewiston, your area where you live down, they have a thriving Main Street economy happening. In Brunswick, our Main Street, we don't have any boarded up windows. It's amazing. And the last thing I think that people who voted on question 2 realize is that they're punishing those businesses that are thriving, that are helping the local economy, the economy of your town. And I think it's, if they were more aware of the fact that 16,000 of these people or households per se that are going to be subject to that 3% surtax, 11,000 of them are small businesses. And I think that would really change people's perspective. So we're really doing our best to bring that information to light and to educate people.
Right. I think some people have this Scrooge McDuck vision that we're, there's these rich people who are just swimming in their money and we're just going to take some of that. But that's not really what it is. You're exactly right. The vast majority are small businesses. This is not just money sitting around. This is money that's going and investing in small businesses that create jobs and create economic opportunity. And I don't know if the Democrats of the state realize this, but we don't have a lot of that to go around. We need more of it. We need more economic opportunity. And with taxes like these, what we are saying is that investment goes where it's welcome. And what we're saying is this kind of investment, this kind of job creation, that's welcome in states like New Hampshire and Florida, but it's not welcome here in Maine. And that's not the message that I want to give. That's not the message Republicans want to give. But that's the message that as Democrats drag their knuckles and trying to punish successful people and steal more money from them, that's the message that we're sending.
It's terrible. Well, Senator, thank you so much for taking some time out of a very demanding week and speaking to us and giving us some inside information and perspective on what's happening up here in Augusta.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Thank you.